This is part 3 of the Essential Preschool IEP module. This presentation focuses on transportation, least restrictive environment, and meeting participants. Section 8 of the IEP addresses transportation as a related service. Transportation is one of the many important services that an LEA may have to provide to allow access to special education and related services required for preschool children with disabilities. If the IEP team determines that transportation is required, then this section of the IEP must be completed. The first question asks, does the child require special transportation? Refer to Operating Standards 5501, 5110 for specific information about special transportation. If the IEP team determines the answer to this question is yes, then the answer to the question, does the child need modifications or accommodations for transportation, also should be yes. If the IEP team determines the answer to this question is no, then this means the child is provided his or her services at home, and/or the child does not need any specialized transportation, such as the child exceeds the height, weight requirements for safety harnesses, and so does not need a safety harness. The second question asks, does the child need transportation to and from services? This question refers to services the IEP team has determined the child requires as part of his or her IEP. The district must provide access to those services in the location that is required by the IEP. Even if another agency or entity is providing transportation, the district should answer yes to this question to indicate the child requires transportation to access a free, appropriate public education. The district should list whoever is providing the transportation and where the child is being transported under the third question, Other box. For example, State Head Start is transporting the child from home to school and back, or parents are transporting the child from home to school and back. This question should always be answered as yes, unless the child is receiving his or her services at home. The third question is, does the child need modifications or accommodations for transportation? The answer to this question should always be yes, unless the child is receiving his or her services at home. Check the appropriate boxes to indicate what special transportation is needed. Check the other box to list other accommodations or modifications. And remember, if you answered yes to question 2, to also list in this section who is providing the transportation and where the child is being transported. In Section 10 of the IEP, the General Factors section of the IEP, a third grade reading component was added to the form. This component is for all students in grades K through 3. If preschool was selected on the cover page, then the third grade reading question is not applicable. Section 11 of the IEP, the LRE section, contains both the school age and preschool questions. Regardless of age level, the least restrictive environment section requires the IEP team to provide a justification statement if a child receives services, including related services, anywhere other than in the general education setting with non-disabled peers. For preschool, multiple questions are listed, but not all of the questions need to be answered. Which questions need to be answered depends upon the response to the first question. Does the child attend a general education setting? The following slides will provide information on the sequence of questions, as well as provide further explanation of the questions. To do that, we will cover 3 scenarios. Scenario 1. What happens if you respond yes to the first question and yes to the second question? Scenario 2. What happens if you respond yes to the first question and no to the second question? And Scenario 3. What happens if you respond no to the first question? The first question asks, does the child attend a general education setting? In order to answer this question, it is important to understand what is meant by a general education setting. A general education setting is a setting in which the child will be receiving instruction in the general education curriculum taught by a general education teacher with non-disabled peers in natural proportions and receiving instruction at the level required in rule, which is a minimum of 360 hours of programming per year, which must include instruction in the general education curriculum. The types of preschool classrooms that may meet the criteria of instruction in the general education curriculum taught by a general education teacher with non-disabled peers in natural proportions are public school preschool general education class, including a co-taught class, non-public school preschool program, and Head Start preschool program. These classroom types would be considered general education settings as long as the child is also receiving a minimum of 360 hours of programming per year. If you answer yes to this first question, then you must answer the next question. Does the child receive all of his or her special education and related services embedded within regular classroom routines and activities? To answer this question, it is important to consider if the child is receiving services not only embedded within regular classroom routines and activities, but also with non-disabled peers. To answer yes to this question, the child must be receiving all of his or her special education and related services embedded and with non-disabled peers. If you answer yes to the second question, then there are no further questions to respond to in this section. If you answer yes to the first question and no to the second question, does the child receive all of his or her special education and related service embedded within regular classroom routines and activities, then you must answer a third question. What prevents the child from receiving special education and or related services embedded within the regular classroom routines and activities? A justification must be provided if the child is removed from instruction with non-disabled peers. The justification should provide evidence as to why the child cannot receive instruction with non-disabled peers and should not simply be a description that the child was removed. The justification must be based on the individual needs of the child, not the child's disability, and aligns with SDI or related services location, reflect that the team has given adequate consideration to meeting the student's needs in the general classroom with supplementary aids and services, document that the nature of severity of the disability is such that education in general education classes, even with the use of supplementary aids and services, cannot be achieved satisfactorily, and describe potential harmful effects to the child or others, if applicable. After answering this third question, there are no further LRE questions to answer. Going back to the first question, does the child attend a general education setting? Remember that we defined a general education setting on slide 6. If you answer no to this first question, then you must answer 2 additional questions. The first question being, what prevents the child from being able to attend a general education setting? To answer this question, you need to justify why the child is not attending a general education setting. The justification must be based on the individual needs of the child, not the child's disability, and aligns with SDI or related services location, reflect that the team has given adequate consideration to meeting the student's needs in the general classroom with supplementary aids and services, document that the nature or severity of the disability is such that education in general education classes, even with the use of supplementary aids and services, cannot be achieved satisfactorily, and describe potential harmful effects to the child or others, if applicable. If applicable, you must also include a justification for why the child is not receiving the amount of instruction required in rule. Note that services in the home or service provider location must equal a minimum of 1 hour a week in the general education curriculum that includes SDI. Other settings must equal a minimum of 360 hours a year. Any justification for reduced hours of instruction must be based on the needs of the child and not on staffing or organizational needs. The second question, who provides the child instruction in the general education curriculum, must also be answered. The intent of this question is to make sure that the child is actually receiving general education instruction, not just special education services. 2 areas must be covered in the response to this question: the role of the person providing instruction in the general education curriculum, and how that person is providing access to the general education curriculum. If the person providing the general education instruction is qualified to teach preschool general education, then simply list that person's role. For example, if an itinerant early childhood intervention specialist is providing the preschool general education to a child at home, then the role early childhood intervention specialist would be listed in response to Part 1 of this question. If the person providing the general education instruction is not qualified to teach preschool general education, then a qualified staff member will need to consult with that other person. The roles of both individuals would need to be listed. For example, an IEP team decides that the SLP will provide itinerant services to a child at home. The SLP is not qualified to teach preschool general education, so the IEP team has a preschool general education teacher consult with the SLP on a regular basis to determine how to embed the special education services within the general education curriculum. In the IEP Section 7, Specially Designed Instruction, the SLP is listed as the provider. In the IEP Section 7, Support for School Personnel, the general education teacher is listed as consulting with the SLP. In the IEP Section 11, the SLP with consultation from the preschool general education teacher would be listed in response to Part 1 of the question. In addition to identifying the role of the provider, you must also describe how that person is providing the child with access to the general education curriculum. As a reminder, Section 12, statewide and district-wide testing, and Section 13, test exemptions, do not need to be completed for preschool. Section 14 documents meeting participation. The form has a drop-down menu which allows you to select your position title. The parent must be afforded the opportunity to participate. The school district is responsible to ensure that meetings are scheduled early enough so that all parties have the opportunity to attend at a mutually agreed upon place and time. In an attempt to ensure parental participation, the parents and school district may agree to some alternate means of participating, such as video conferencing or phone conferences. If alternate means are chosen, they must be documented as such. This is documented at the top left-hand side of the meeting participation page of the IEP. In some cases, members of the IEP team may be excused from attending the IEP meeting, in whole or in part, provided the school district and parent agree in writing prior to the meeting. The required members include parent, general education teacher, special education teacher / provider, and a district representative. For school age, if the child does not have a general education teacher during the school day, a general education teacher is not a required team member. However, for preschool, a general education teacher is always a required IEP team member. This should be noted on the IEP signature page. Teachers who attend the IEP should have working knowledge of the student's individual learning needs. The excused member must provide input into the development of the IEP in writing to the district and to the parent prior to the meeting. They are also required to sign the completed IEP form under people not in attendance, who provided information and recommendations on the meeting participation page. If this is the initial IEP meeting, the parent must sign to implement services. The parent must receive the PRO1 summarizing the events of the IEP meeting along with the procedural safeguards notice prior to services beginning for the child. Districts need to remember that while an IEP is in effect for 364 days from the date signed, it is a living document and can and should be revised as necessary. Any member of the team may request a meeting to revise the IEP. This can be done through the amendment process, which can be accomplished through a variety of methods. This process does not necessarily need to be a face-to-face meeting, but the parent does need to be involved. Remember, amendments need to be noted on the IEP cover page as well as in any relevant IEP sections. If the district proposes a change of placement for a child, the IEP team is required to meet to discuss the change. According to operating standards, a change of placement means a change from one option on the continuum of alternative placements to another. The team needs to determine if this is in fact a change in the continuum of services for the child. The continuum of services ranges from instruction in general education, special schools, home instruction, instruction in hospitals and institutions. If the change in the student services proposed does in fact change the student's placement on the continuum of services, the parent must give consent in writing for that placement to happen.